they make a contract, you have your representatives. What happens is that the studio makes an offer first. So you receive the offer, and then the writer's representatives will negotiate it. And if there's a blockage where the client, the writer, and the representatives aren't happy with the deal, that's where the agent or manager will call the studio and the network, or if it's a film, the film producer, the film studio, and have a conversation about why their writer client deserves more. And so in the US, it's very important to have representatives because they are the writer's advocates. They handle everything from identifying the job, finding the job, negotiating it.
메이저든 마이너든 스튜디오랑 계약을 하게 되면 아무리 시작하는 작가나 감독이어도 에이전트가 붙는 게 일반적이에요. 왜냐면은 개인이 2만 불을 예를 들어서 받고 싶다, 아니면 뭐 2억을 받고 싶다. 자기가 얘기하는 게 좀 그렇잖아요. 내가 내 몸값을 저 1억인데 1억만 주세요. 이렇게 얘기하는 게 되게 어색하잖아요. 그런 부분에 있어서 이제 에이전트나 매니저나 변호사들이 그 역할들을 대신해서 해주는 거죠. 아무리 처음 하는 작가도 그래서 나 스튜디오랑 계약할 것 같아 라고 하면 대부분의 에이전트들이나 뭐 변호사나 아니면 매니저들이 그럼 내가 너를 도와줄게 라고 하는 경우도 많죠. 왜냐면 에이전트 같은 경우는 10%를 피로 받을 수 있거든요. 일단은 에이전트는 법적으로 10%를 받게 돼 있어요. 에이전트의 시험을 봐야 돼요. 여기 부동산 에이전트들, 뭐 엔터테인먼트 에이전트들은 시험을 봐서 그 에이전트의 그 증이 있어야 되고요. 공식적으로 합법적으로 10%를 받고 어떻게 보면은 잡코리아 같은 느낌인 거죠. 여기에 들어가면 이들이 이 친구의 일거리를 잡아주는 대신 내가 10% 수수료를 받는다라는 개념. 그게 에이전트고요. 한 에이전트가 100명까지도 있는 경우들이 있어요. 클라이언트가. 그런데 이제 매니저는 그거보다 더 작죠. 10명 아래 정도의 클라이언트를 모시고 있으면서 좀 더 긴밀하게 계약적인 거를 직접 매니저는 못해요. 근데 매니저는 제작을 할 수가 있어요. 에이전시는 제작을 못해요. 불법이에요. 미국의 엔터테인먼트 변호사는 똑같이 에이전트처럼 일이 만약에 만들어지고 계약을 하게 돼서 돈을 받게 되면 거기에서 5%를 받아요. 그래서 조금 처음 시작하는 사람들한테는 유리하죠. 법률적인 거, 계약서 다 봐주고 일을 결정이 되면 5%를 주면 되는 거니까.
Well, the WGA was established first in 1933. An informal club had existed before that, but in 1933, we officially became a union seeking a contract with the studios. And so we function since then as the labor union or trade union for writers in Hollywood. And so we represent them collectively to the studios who employ the writers. And so because the studios want to hire WGA members, they must make a contract with us. And so we get to negotiate this contract and pursue contractual provisions that benefit writers. And we use the collective strength of writers acting as one in order to pursue those goals.
The Writers Guild is our union, made up of TV writers, screenwriters, and journalists. Every 3 years, they negotiate with the studio and set the minimums. So if the Writers Guild negotiates the minimum, saying you cannot get paid below this.
So all writers have the same protections. They don't necessarily have the same fees, obviously. They're paid differently depending on their experience, but they are protected in terms of how long they write, how long the period is until they have to turn in the script, how many drafts they write is protected. Just they get health care. You know, they have many, many protections from the Writers Guild. The Writers Guild was started here in the 30s. So it's very, very old and a very powerful union.
There's certainly a standard contract for an episodic script, and there's a standard rate, and that's negotiated by the Writers Guild. When you're contributing to a room, you get hired at a certain level, and there are certainly standard provisions of that contract, and there are certain ranges within which you will get paid, but it's all negotiated. So anytime you hire a writer who's a member of the Writers Guild, you have to pay them a minimum weekly amount. Depends on which type of show it is, depends on how many weeks they're there, but there's a formula that is negotiated between the Writers Guild and the producers, the collection of producers. And pretty much all reputable producers are signatory to that agreement, so agree to abide by it.
When you're writing a television pilot script and you're creating it, developing it, you're the writer, there are different steps in the pilot script deal. The first step is commencement, and for that you get paid 10% of the deal. There is a second step called delivery of the story document. It's an outline of the pilot script. That's 20% of the whole script fee. And then the next 40% is for delivery of the first draft. So if you're writing a drama, you're delivering around 50 to 60 pages. And then after that, it's delivery of first set of revisions, revising that draft, and that's 10%. It's the second revision of the draft, that's another 10%. And then the final 10%, you get paid for delivery of the polish and for signing the contract. You just sign the long form contract and deliver the final polish step on the pilot script.
For movies, it's done by steps, meaning we will pay you a 2-step deal. And what that means is we will pay you to do one draft, then you get notes from the studio, and then you do revisions based on the notes, and that's it. Some people do 3-step drafts, meaning you have to do 2 rounds of notes, and every round you get more and more money. And some people only get 1-step draft, meaning you write one draft. If we like it, if we don't, we'll hire another writer. So movies is very simple.
When the writer decides that they're going to turn in their script, it is absolutely prohibited that the company can reject it on creative grounds. The company has no ability to turn it down. The company must simply then pay the writer. There's no creative criteria that they get to judge the draft by, and they cannot push it back. And that's very important.
Basically, all writers who work for WGA signatory companies. So they're all companies approved by the WGA, and these companies will follow the minimum. So there's an agreement that if it's an approved company, they'll follow the MBA. So there's a base minimum of rights and an agreement of money basically that they need to follow, and they are also legally bound to hire WGA writers to work for their projects.
If there's any clear sort of breach of contract between the studios and the WGA can place the studio that made this sort of breach of contract on a list. And they send that out in an email to all the writers, and they say, this company is not adhering to the contract, so you cannot work for them anymore.
Email that says, do not work for this company, and all the writers now know that they're in breach of the contract. Yeah.
So that's one way that if a company really is not cooperating, they basically get kicked out, and all the union writers will not work with them anymore.
If they are unwilling to agree to the terms that the guild wants, then we can officially go on strike to try to force them to at least compromise in a lot of the terms that are made. So that's kind of the power of the union, is that the members of the union can vote to strike, and we can kind of officially put our pens down, not turn in any scripts or outlines or whatnot to try to force the corporations to sort of, agree to the terms of the MBA.
And they need, in order to have a strong union, you need to go on strike. Let's face it, that's what unions do. The way the Writers Guild got so powerful is by rendering the business closed for so long that the studios are suffering. Everybody suffers. I've suffered through 3 strikes already. However, it's through those strikes, hurt the directors, hurt the studios, that finally the studios cave in and they create rules that can't be broken. If the rules are broken, then the studio or the director can be grieved, which means that a complaint can be made to the union and they can be brought up on union charges and they have to pay for that. Also, no other Writers Guild writer will work with someone who's broken those rules. So it tends to be a very powerful thing.
In features and movies, I don't know much about it. I can't speak to that nearly as much, but I know it's a problem where they contract for the script and then haven't agreed to pay you for rewrites, but they still want you to do rewrites and you want to keep them happy. So people keep doing rewrites over and over and over again, even though they're not getting paid because they're afraid to alienate an employer.
That's something that has been one of the issues that the WGA is trying to amend, is that Producers Pass is kind of a secret-free pass that you don't get paid for. So it does happen in the US where writers end up being pressured to do sort of a free polish or free revision, kind of goodwill with the producers almost. But yeah, typically if you are a slightly more established writer, or if you have good representation, if you have good agents that can fight on your behalf to make sure that you are being paid for any work you're doing on a script.
If you're a writer who wrote a pilot script for a network and studio, if the network and studio pass on that project and they don't make it, after 30 months, after the writer was paid, 30 months later, assuming it's not based on intellectual property, IP that the studio or producer or network owns, it's their idea, the rights of that script come back to the writer via the WGA rules, and they can go set it up. Now, if you set up that project after it got passed on at one place and you set it up at a new place, the new network studio has to pay back the last company. And the last company will not only ask for the cost of the pilot script that they paid, they'll ask for a little bit more development costs.
For example, I believe when I sold a project once that was an original idea, after 5 years, if the studio doesn't make it, the rights revert back to me. But it is not as easy as that. Let's say after 5 years, Fox never made this film. After 5 years, that idea comes back. If I ever want to sell it again, the next studio first has to pay Fox back for everything they already paid. I think if writers aren't protected, why would you want to be a writer, right? So I think you don't have, the quality will go down. When I think about my fellow writers in America, they're such amazing people. They're so smart. They're so interesting. But if they can't, make a living, if they can't feed their families, they're going to do something else.
Yeah, I also feel like if you're mistreating writers, you are going to harm creativity in general, along similar lines. But the best projects are the ones where everyone is sort of empowered to be creative and to share their stories and their voice. And if you're not sort of rewarding that appropriately, it will just damage the industry as a whole in terms of the stories that are being told. And
what happened during that time in 2008, because scripted TV shows were not happening and films weren't being written, the non-scripted television business took off, and documentary films.
Like reality shows.
Yes, everything that doesn't require scripts. And what happened was, that was a time when reality stars became more famous. During that time, Kim Kardashian started becoming popular. Donald Trump was on The Apprentice. More non-scripted shows were getting made. And of course, that had a big impact on our culture in America years later. I'm not saying the WGA strike caused that, not at all. What I'm saying is that when writers can't write or asked not to write, the business still moves in a different direction.
But I know that directors get more protections than writers get. But the more demands there are on Korean writers or Korean industry to make international IP, the more valuable writers become. Because there aren't enough Korean directors to make everything, enough new projects. There aren't enough directors in Korea to create all of the material that people want out of Korea right now. That's why it's a really interesting question, because Korea has become as important as England, which is unbelievable, because England has been important for material forever, since the beginning of the movie industry. But in 10 years, Korea has made itself more important than any other country. Korean dramas are loved around the world. And there are Korean dramas that work well in Korea without even having to work around the world. So who's going to support those people so that there's enough product to buy? Because it is wonderful for the Korean industry when there are this many people around the world that want to buy Korean dramas and Korean television shows and make them in America. But if not enough is being created, then the industry will stay regional, small. So its opportunity to be a very big hub of industry depends on healthy writer relationships.
지금 한국 시장이 엄청나게 전 세계에서 진짜 호평을 받고 드라마, 영화 뭐 지금 난리잖아요, 한마디로. 근데 그런 것들을 계속해서 이어가고 또 다른 10년을 계속 준비하려면 정말 지금 시작하는 새롭게 이렇게 지금 발돋움하려는 신인 작가님들을 권익을 보호할 수 있는 어떤 국가적인 이 사회적인 시스템이 꼭 마련돼야 된다고 생각을 들어요.
We have the power to create story from a blank page. Writers often forget that they have that power, but I think we have to remind ourselves and then remind everyone else that we deserve to be treated equally next to producers and directors and actors.